Hi, friends. Welcome. If you're here to learn about ACP, you're in the right place.
Hello.
If you don't know what ACP is, you're probably still in the right place. We're going to give folks just another minute to join, okay?
It's so fun seeing some of your faces and having seen some of your faces in real life last week. So that's so awesome.
I couldn't agree more. All right, while we're waiting for everyone else, go ahead and put your name in the chat, where you're sitting today, and the organization you represent. We'd love to get to know you if we don't know you already. I'm Amy Huffman. I'm the Policy Director for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and we are about to talk about the Affordable Connectivity Program. So if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. I'll give it one more quick minute before we get started. It was so great to see everyone. Okay, so again, I'm Amy Huffman, the Policy Director for NDIA, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. If you're here today to learn about the Affordable Connectivity Program, you're in the right place. Before we get started, though, I did just want to recognize that today is a very unique and unsettling day, as we all woke up to the news that there is a war happening on the other side of the world. And so wanted to give us a minute of silence to sit and think about the families that are being impacted by this on the other side of the world, and send up thoughts, prayers, good vibes, whatever you would like in this. Okay. And if you have family or anyone that's impacted by what's going on overseas, just know that we're here for you in whatever way that we can be. Because this community is a real community. We're not just an organization scattered across the country. We are friends and allies in this work. Okay, so as Caitlin pulls up the slides, I just want to give a brief overview of who we are and what we do. So you are at a webinar hosted by NDA, we're the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We got started about 7, maybe close to 8 years now ago by our wonderful executive director, Angela Seifert, and our former policy director, Bill Callahan. And we're here to represent you all. We're here to represent the folks across the country doing the boots on the ground digital inclusion work, making sure that folks get connected to the internet, know how to navigate it, know how to get online and get the devices and skills that they need to thrive in the digital age. We do a mix of things. We do policy work, working with the federal government to make sure that they know you exist and what your interests are and what you need. And then also we do technical assistance training, and we're a community first and foremost, where we get together like this last week in person in Portland, which was wonderful. This week we're back online to talk about new programs, but also to hear from each other and learn from each other. So a couple of things just to note today. This is a webinar format, and there's a lot of information to cover. So I'm going to go through it. not super quickly, just so we can all take it in. And then if you have any questions at the end, we'll open up, we'll take the slides down and we'll open up a time for question Q&A. And if there's anything I can't answer, our wonderful policy fellow, Josh Mamura, is here to also help answer those questions. And then do keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. When we get to the Q&A, please use the hand raise function. Normal Zoom etiquette. And Lo on our team is here to help with any Zoom issues that you might have as we go. Okay, so we're going to get started and learn about the Affordable Connectivity Program. Next slide, please. So this is what we're going to go through today. First, we're going to go over an overview of the program and then talk about the general provisions of the program. We'll talk about the rules that the FCC outlined for the transition from the emergency broadband benefit to the Affordable Connectivity Program. We'll talk a little bit about the new things that are included in the rules around to protect consumers. And then we'll talk about there is proposed rulemaking for a couple programs included in the program that FCC wants comment on. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Okay, next slide. All right, so what is the Affordable Connectivity Program and why do we have it? Well, the Affordable Connectivity Program is Congress's and the federal government, the whole federal government's acknowledgement that affordability is a major barrier for households to get online, meaning that the internet's too expensive for many households, and that the federal government needs to do something about it to make sure that more households can subscribe to the internet that is available to them, if it's available to them, right? The Affordable Connectivity Program is a continuation of the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, which was first established in 2020, I believe, by Congress through the Consolidated Appropriations Act. That was one of the COVID relief bills that Congress passed. The original program had $3.2 billion, the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. However, the ACP, or the Affordable Connectivity Program, has $14.2 billion. So it's a whole lot more dollars attached to this program. And in the report and order that we'll talk about in a minute, it's described as a longer term broadband affordability program, meaning it's not permanent, right? It's still not permanent, but it is longer term. And we do anticipate that this will last for at least 4 to 5 years, depending on the number of households that sign up. It will be just as the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program was managed by them, it will be managed by the Federal Communications Commission and their subsidiary called the Universal Service Administration Corporation, which manages a lot of their programs their funding programs that they have. The FCC did adopt rules to govern this program, and those were adopted on January 14th of this year. Next slide, please. So what are some general things about the program? Next slide. So the benefit is $30 for non-tribal households that qualify for the program, and $75 for tribal households or households in high cost areas. And what this means is it's a discount on your internet service. And that discount goes direct, a household signs up and the provider takes that $30 off whatever their total bill is. So say their bill is $50 a month. With the ACP, their bill now becomes $20 a month. The benefit also provides $100 for eligible connected devices. So that's a computer, laptop, tablet. We'll talk a little bit more about what those can be. And the benefit is limited to one discount and one device per household. So you can't have multiple, you can't obtain multiple devices through this program per household, and you can't obtain multiple discounts per household. Next slide, please. All right, so what is an eligible service? So what can this discount be applied to? So it's actually any internet service offering from any internet service provider that enrolls in the program. Importantly, providers are not mandated or required to participate in the program. It's a voluntary program. So depending on where you live or your constituents live, a provider in that area may or may not be participating in the program. That said, all of the national companies are participating in the program that have national footprints, and more providers are, and when I say provider, I mean an internet service provider. More and more providers are participating in the program, and will continue to be able to. Like if they don't sign up today, they can still sign up later if they want to. So for a household that receives a benefit, that benefit can be applied to any of the packages or services, that internet services that provider offers. There are no minimum service standards, meaning there's no speed thresholds or requirements. So the discount can be applied to any of the packages the service provider offers. So that could be 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload. It could be 100 megabits download, 100 megabits upload. It could be 5 megabits download, 1 megabit upload. So there's no standards there. And a connected device is defined as a laptop, desktop, computer, or a tablet. They specifically call out phablets or phones / tablets as not eligible, and phones are not eligible either. Next slide, please. Okay, so the connected devices actually do have to come from the provider providing the ACP discounted service. And the minimum service system requirements for the devices are listed out in the report and order that was adopted in January. It includes things like it needs to be able to make two-way conferencing calls and things of that nature. And if you're interested in more detail, we can make sure to get it to you. Next slide, please. All right, so who can enroll in the program? So a lot of these requirements or eligibility requirements are similar or the same as the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, but there's a couple key changes and we've actually highlighted them for you here. So any household that has an income that's at or below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines or thresholds can participate in the program. And then if they participate in any of the federal assistance programs, such as SNAP, Medicaid, federal public housing assistance, Social Security, WIC, or the Lifeline program, which is the other program managed by the FCC that's for low-income households. It's a $10 a month subsidy for phone service or broadband service. If they already participate in Lifeline, they're automatically eligible for the program. Next slide, please. In addition, if they participate in a tribal specific program, they are also eligible for this program. Or if they are approved to receive benefits under the free and reduced price lunch school program at their school, then they're eligible for the program. And then there's a whole host of entire schools that are eligible called community eligibility provision schools. If a student attends one of those schools, anyone in that school is eligible for the program. Next slide, please. Also, if you happen to have received a federal Pell Grant during this current award year, or you already meet the eligibility criteria for a participating provider's existing low-income program, then you would be eligible. So a participating low-income program might be, so a provider has a low-cost offer. So they have a program that's $15 a month if you meet X, Y, and Z requirements. So if it's not already one of those eligibility criteria we just went over, some other random eligibility criteria for this program, then and a household is enrolled in that, then they would be automatically eligible for the ACP. Two eligibility categories were eliminated from the ACP that were eligible under EBB are no longer eligible under ACP, and that's substantial loss of income due to the pandemic and having participated in a provider's COVID-19 program. These aren't really relevant anymore, and so the Congress eliminated them as as pathways for eligibility to the program. And one thing to note that I didn't say already, and I apologize for not doing so, a household does not have to meet all of these criteria. Each of these is its own eligibility pathway. So if they meet one of these criteria, then they're eligible for the program. Next slide, please. Some other things to note. There is a way for some types of organizations to be bulk purchasers, meaning that so if a household lives in a multi-dwelling unit, like a senior center or student housing or a homeless shelter, then those organizations can, and if you live in that unit and you receive your households, like you don't pay for the internet directly, you pay your landlord for everything all together and internet's included, then that landlord, we'll just call him landlord, can be a bulk purchaser for ACP, meaning they can apply for ACP on behalf of the folks living in the building, and everyone in the building can be eligible for it if they meet the requirements. It's a bit complicated, but there's rules outlined in the report and order. And the FCC also is now allowing school districts and libraries to be bulk purchasers if they meet the requirements of the other portions of the report and order. Next, so in terms of adoption of Lifeline usage requirements, the subscriber must use their service at least once every 30 days. And after 30 consecutive days of non-usage, the provider is required to notify the consumer that they'll be de-enrolled from the program if they don't begin using their service. So this is to prevent households that maybe aren't using the service for whatever reason. Maybe they've moved or whatnot, and so households will be de-enrolled if they're not using the service. Next slide. And households will need to certify annually. They'll be given 60 days to respond to requests for recertification. And if a household is already enrolled in the Lifeline program, then if they recertify with Lifeline, then they'll be automatically recertified with ACP. And if they recertify with ACP, they'll automatically be recertified with Lifeline. So you don't have to do both. Next slide, please. All right, so how does a household apply? Well, they can either apply directly through a participating internet service provider, or they can complete an application online, or they can print and mail an application. They can also, so then the next step after they apply is if they're approved by USAC, then they choose the participating internet service provider they'd like to receive their service from, and then they sign up for the service. One thing to note is that third parties, so organizations like yours, you can assist households with enrollment as long as that household's physically present and can sign their application and certify it. You can't do it on their behalf if they're not physically present for you. You can't sign on behalf of them, but if they're physically present with you and they don't have the digital skills to complete the application online, you can do it with them while they're there. In addition, the FCC will be starting a pilot program with third-party organizations to figure out how to, for those third-party organizations to enroll folks in the program better. We don't know a whole lot about that pilot program and what it will look like, and the FCC hasn't given a lot of detail on that yet, but just know that is coming and that it might be something for you all to keep an eye on and see if that's something you want to participate in, as you all often work with folks needing to enroll in this program. And then there's a couple of systems to know that the FCC and USAC use for the program. The first is the national verifier, and this is the system that's used to figure out if a household is actually eligible for the program. It's called a system of systems, but it's basically connects state and federal eligibility databases. So Medicaid, the Pell Grants, et cetera. And it can automatically check and confirm if a household's eligible for the program electronically. The next is the National Lifeline Accountability Database. And this is the database that's being used for enrollment. So this is what providers use to enroll their households in the ACP and Lifeline, and then also manage those ACP and Lifeline subscribers in that database. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we are in the midst of what's called the transition, and we're about to actually move out of the transition period, which is why we had this webinar right now. Next slide. The transition period was from the time that the EBB program officially stopped signing people up to March 1st. There was a 60-day transition period outlined in the IIJA that gave households a grace period from the transition from the EBB, households who were already enrolled in the EBB program before they transferred to the ACP program. So we're going to go through kind of a complex way that the FCC sort of threaded the needle of making sure that households that were already enrolled in the EBB program don't lose service, but also that they don't, those same households don't have a bill shock. And it's a bit complicated, so just stick with me. But there's two terms to know before we get started on this. So there's opt-in and opt-out. An opt-in is when households need to consent to participate in ACP. And opt-out means that they're automatically rolled over to ACP. And it's up to the household then to indicate that they would not like to participate in the program. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so FCC is calling households that participated in the EBB legacy households. And there's basically three categories that they're bucketing these households into. And it's a recognition that this is complicated. Transitioning people over from a $50 a month benefit to a $30 a month benefit, trying to make sure that people don't have interruption in service, but also don't have bill shock is complicated. So there's three categories of households that they have determined that, and they've made different provisions for. So the first is that an EBB household that wouldn't experience a bill change as a result of the reduction of the benefit drop from $50 to $30. And it's important it says non-tribal here because the tribal benefit didn't change. The tribal benefits was at $75 in EBB and it's going to remain at $75 in ACP. So, okay. The households that that there's going to be no bill change for them as a result of the reduction, they will be automatically transferred from EBB to ACP. And if they don't want to stay, they don't want to keep the ACP, they will need to opt out. So they will need to tell that provider they no longer want to participate in the program. That's the first category. The second category are households that would experience a bill increase, but they've already expressed to their current provider that they have a willingness and an ability to pay for broadband. So a household that was already a subscriber with a provider before the EBB program was implemented would likely fall in this category. And these households also will just be automatically transferred from the EBB to ACP program. And they will have to opt out of the program, meaning they will have to tell the provider they no longer want to participate in the program. Next slide, please. Now this one's where it gets a little bit complicated. So the third category of households are the households that would experience a bill increase, but they haven't indicated to their current provider either a willingness to pay, and they either generally or at the end of the EBB program. So they haven't said that they are willing to pay, and they also haven't demonstrated that by already being a subscriber prior to the program, et cetera. And they would experience a bill increase. So say they originally didn't have, their original plan was $50 a month, EBB also covered $50 a month. Now the ACP is only going to cover $30, so they'd have that extra $20 to pay. that's a bill shock, that's a bill increase. And so providers have 3 options for this category of household. Next slide, please. First, the provider can switch that household to an internet service that costs $30 or less a month after providing notice in advance of this change. I should just say out front, providers are required to provide ample notice of all of these changes. So any household that you're working with that was already enrolled in the EBB program should have received a lot of notice from their provider about any of these options and changes and the change to the program in general. So then the second option is that the provider will continue to provide the current level of service without increasing the household's bill if the provider has internet service options that are priced at $30 a month or less. And then the third option is that the provider would then obtain the consumer's opt-in consent to continue to receive its current service with the $30 benefit level before the first increased bill, which would be after next week, March 1st, at the end of the transition period. It's a bit complicated, but we'll make sure these slides are available. Also want to go ahead and plug Benton. They have done a summary of all of this. So if you're at all confused about any of this, you can go back and check that later. Next is that the providers have a 60-day period to accommodate any internet service offering rule. So remember a few minutes ago, we talked about that internet service providers have to make all of their plans available for the program. That was not the case during the EBB. Some providers chose to do that, but they really only had to have one plan that was eligible for the program, and if they chose to participate in the program at all. Because it was such a short transition window, and there's a lot actually it's kind of complicated to make all of your plans eligible. Providers have a 60-day grace period to make all of them available. And so that's going to end I think May 1st, I think. Josh will correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. Next slide, please. All right, so there were some additional consumer protections added to the program through the IIJA that we're pretty happy about. So things that will protect the consumers. So the first thing is that credit checks are prohibited in most circumstances. Paragraph 138 of the report and order has more details, but basically those details are the only reason why a provider can check for the credit is if they were doing so already for a different purpose, like say somebody's trying to sign up for a package that like includes TV, voice, and internet. So if they were checking the credit for the TV and internet or voice, then that's not prohibited. But it is prohibited to check for anyone signing up for the ACP service alone. Inappropriate upselling and downselling is prohibited. If you've been doing this work for the past year, you'll remember after EBB first rolled out last May, there was some inappropriate upselling and that happened, meaning that providers were trying, we did hear of some customer service folks upselling folks and people getting on plans that were higher than the $50 benefit. So that's prohibited under the new act. And in terms of non-payment, so say that a household does have a copay, it's $20 a month. If they don't pay that part, the provider can terminate the service, but they have, but only after 90 days of non-payment. So 3 months. So if a household doesn't pay for 3 months, then they can terminate the service. But they also have to notify the household of that. Next slide, please. And then there's also there is some mitigation to prevent termination for non-payment. They can downgrade a household to a lower price service plan if a household enters a delinquent status. And again, they do have to, there's some pretty heavy-handed notice requirements that providers have to meet before they actually terminate a household for non-payment. There's now a dedicated complaint process for this program. If you ever tried to help a household make a complaint about this program before, you had to do it in a roundabout way on the USAC's page or FCC's page. And now there will be a dedicated complaint process. So it won't be as complicated. And I would highly recommend that anytime you're working with a household that's having an issue that they shouldn't be having based on what you just heard through all these slides or your own read of the report and order or what have you, then I would encourage you to encourage that consumer to create a complaint for the FCC, because once they have that record, then they can have justification to go look into it. And they often need that record. And then it also helps them identify patterns. So it is important that the FCC actually receive complaints about different things that should not be happening to consumers if they're happening. Another thing is that there's restrictions on households seeking to switch offerings or providers. So providers, a household can only transfer. So say a household applies their ACP benefit to a mobile service. But then they decide that they want to actually apply it to their wireline service or their cable service. They can transfer that, but they can only do it once a month. And then there's also more disclosures and consent requirements that are now required for these transfers to happen. And that's in part because there was some questionable things going on under the EBB where folks were being transferred from one service to another without really understanding that or knowing it in some cases. And so there's some more rules around that and barriers to that happening without a consumer having the understanding that's about to happen. Next slide, please. Okay, so coming up, next slide, the FCC within the, it's kind of interesting actually, and unique. The FCC published rules in January to govern the program, but within those rules, they said there's a couple things that we really don't know how to do well, and we want more comments on how to do that well. And so they're seeking public comment on on 3 different items that Congress gave the FCC the authority to do, but the FCC is like, we've never done this before. We don't really know how to do it. So we would like more comment from you, public and experts on how to actually do these things. Quickly, those comments are due Wednesday, March 16th. And then reply comments are due Friday, April 15th. And there's 3 things they're wanting comment on. And the first is the thing that we're most excited about that Congress gave FCC authority to do. And we're really excited that FCC is dedicated to doing this. And that's an outreach grant program. And that's a grant program for community-based organizations, community anchor institutions to do outreach about the program to households so that households have that personal touch from you all, the folks that actually know the people in the community, and that you all are resourced with the dollars to actually do that work. That was a big gap in the EBB program, and we think one of the reasons it wasn't more successful. And we are excited that the FCC actually wants to do this and do this well. So that's the first thing they're looking for comments on is how to structure that grant program, how to do that well. We will be submitting comments on that in this next part, this next program. And we also just, for our subscribers and folks in the room, we are hosting a working group in the coming weeks to figure out what those comments should say. So next up is they're also launching a pilot program that's going to be focused on eligible households that are participating in federal public housing assistance programs. And they want comments on how to launch a pilot program. And that's focused on expanding ACP participation in these federal public housing assistance programs. and helping those households navigate the enrollment process, et cetera. And so they're looking for, again, comments on how to do that and how to do that well. Next slide, please. And finally, they are looking for comment on how to do how to create an enhance or implement an enhanced benefit for high cost areas. And high cost areas are areas that the FCC deems is really expensive to get broadband to. And so they recognize that some areas of the country are more expensive than others for whatever reason to get broadband to those areas. And so they're wanting to establish a mechanism that says that we understand it's more expensive to get there, therefore the subsidy for providing service there should be higher. And they still haven't quite figured that out. So they'd like more comment on that and how to implement that mechanism. The FCC is mandated to directly approve broadband providers, which are not already state approved. Sorry. Okay. That's a good question, Ellis. I believe it's on a rolling basis that they approve providers and as they get them. I don't recall if there's a time limit, but as I know, they have to do it quickly, as I understand. No, the entities for the pilot program have not been selected, and there's not a lot of information about it in the report and order. And again, anyone, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and you can ask it verbally if you'd like, or you can keep them coming in the chat. And if you asked a question earlier while I was presenting and I didn't get to it, feel free to bring it up again. Christine, I'm not sure where one indicates interest in being a third-party provider. Hopefully we'll get more information from the FCC on that soon. There's not a lot of information on it in the report and order. It's like a tiny paragraph with not much detail. So hopefully we'll get more information from them soon. Okay. Any other questions? These have been good so far. I know you guys have more.
Amy, you mentioned that there was an option for ISPs to take a user down to a $30 fee if it was available. It doesn't affect the quality of their service, right? Like if they're paying less and if an ISP has the option for $30, will they still be receiving the same service that they were previously receiving under EBB?
It's a great question, Miles. Actually, it could. It doesn't necessarily have to affect their level of service, but it could affect their level of service. It depending on the provider, what plans that or the types of plans that provider has, and what those cost offerings are for those types of plans. All right, Andrew, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you. Perfectly timed. I just took a bite of granola. So forgive me if you hear crunching. My question, you partially responded to it as far as the third-party verifier pilot program. I guess I'm asking a slightly different question in that, are you all seeing any models or partnerships at a state level of aggregated service of administration of the ACP program on behalf of ISPs? And if not, is that something that would be prohibited by nature of rule?
So just let me restate the question so I understand. So at an aggregated level of service at the state level, so like, so maybe it's like the state Department of Health and Human Services.
That's right.
As like a bulk contract. Yeah, so that's not going to be eligible under the rules. The types of entities that could be that third party or do that bulk arrangement are multi-dwelling units. So an example of that's like an apartment home or senior living or student living, homeless shelters, school districts, and libraries are the ones that are outlined in the report and order. Andrew, part of the reason likely for this, for a whole state not being able to do it is, first, I'm not aware of any provider that has equal service across an entire state. So having a bulk purchase agreement for an entire state is difficult. Second, it really is first and foremost a contract, not a contract, but so to speak, between the FCC and the provider. And so they tend to go directly through the provider, but we'll do these bulk purchases and kind of is like kind of an exception to the norm with the MDUs, the homeless shelters, the school districts, and libraries. So those are that's my quick, reasons why that's not the case. But does that answer?
That's helpful. In part, yes. It's helpful in prompting further inquiry. So thanks.
Ron has a question about the $100 device stipend. The client can only spend between 5 and 50. Yes, so the range is $10 to 50, so very close, as Josh noted. And yes, the max would then be that's $150 price point. And under the EBB, not every provider participated in that because it was kind of difficult to do. We'll see what happens under the ACP, how many providers participate in the device access portion of the program.
Hey, Amy, we got a question over the listserv this morning that there's been some conversation about regarding EBB and ACP data. I think the gist of it was someone was trying to understand, can I look at EBB data and compare it to the new ACP participant data and compare the two or understand if that is capturing everyone? And it sounds like what you were saying is with the transition right now with the opt-in and opt-out, you probably can't compare them. You can look at one or the other, but you can't assume that all EBB participants are also captured under the ACP data. Is that right?
That's what I would say. I'm not sure that's what the FCC is saying. So in the report and order, it outlines that roughly 9 million households or above enrolled in the EBB program, and then as of the date of the report and order, which was January 16th or so, 265,000 households had already enrolled in ACP, which is significant. So they're saying now that 10 million households are enrolled in the ACP program because they're assuming that 9 million number transfers over to the ACP. I anticipate we will see some drop there, and we'll see the data be a little bit shaky for a few months, and then it'll even out. If that's helpful, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'll just add for now, I wanted to bring that up with this group because I think at least a couple of the people who were part of that email chain are on this. For now, I think our advice would be to use that data with caution because it's going through this transition period where they're kind of figuring out who will continue or how many might opt out. So we would say use caution, probably look at, if you're looking at zip code data, which I think most folks on this call would be looking at how many people in a particular area of your community have signed up. It would probably be best to look at both the ACP and EBB data individually to get an idea of how many people participated in that program or are participating in the new program. And as we know more, as that shakes out, we'll share more.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Mary has a question about bulk purchases with emergency connectivity funds and ACP. Yeah, I mean, it does make it confusing. And I suspect that there's more guidance that is needed from the FCC around that on how to participate in both. I'm not sure about the double dipping. And then the third party organizations, Carol's asking if third-party organizations and individuals are allowed to charge individuals for helping them fill out ACP enrollment sign-up forms. To my knowledge, there's nothing that prohibits it in the report and order, but because it's free for a household to do it on their own, I don't know that I'd recommend it, particularly since the households that are enrolling in this are low-income households. Do I know of any further breakout of data plan to be included in demographics in addition to zip code? Good question, Cindy. I don't think so, but we can look that up for you and get back to you. And as a note to everyone, for anything that I just said, I don't know too, which was quite a bit. We're going to find that out, and we'll put the answers to those in a blog post and send them out to you all. Real quick too, before we lose any time, but I'll try to answer these last two. I do want to say, if you are here and you are new to the NDI community, a big welcome to you. Thank you for being here. We would love if you would join our community, subscribe to our listserv, get involved. It's you all that make this work so much fun and enjoyable to do. Let me go back up to a couple of these questions. Internet provider. Yes, it is bureaucratic, and we do need to make an employee a full-time expert in the program. Yeah, so the FCC incentive. Okay, that's a good question. So that is what the FCC is asking for, comments on how to stand up a grant program to provide organizations like yours funding to continue to do this outreach, with the recognition that, yes, this is a lot of work for you all to be up to date, understand what's going on, when, be able to walk a household through all the hiccups they might encounter in enrolling in the program. And so they are standing up a grant program for organizations like yours. They haven't figured it out yet because they've never done a grant program like that before. So they're asking for comments on how to do that well. And those are the comments that are due March 16th. Claudia is asking, some of the schools in our district are in the USDA community eligibility provision. They need the child has to be enrolled in that school, and you have to have verification and proof that that child is enrolled in that school. They can't just reside in the community. Yes, Claudia, you do need a student enrolled. Thank you, Pamela. All right, last one. Yes, the application does ask for additional documentation for CEP eligible schools. They can, yes, families can upload a report card to prove that they attend the school. It has to have the school's address on it. And then you also have to have verification, like some sort of something that shows that your child is enrolled in that school to get the benefit through that mechanism. All right, unless there's any other questions. Oh, okay. That's good to know, Magdalena. Yes, I remember that conversation. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted by the comments and going back and forth. But I am so thankful for you all being here, and continue to ask questions on our listserv if things come up, and we will continue to push out information as we learn it. And good luck on getting as many folks enrolled in the program as we can. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.